This is a story about how a single moment of disrespect can reveal a lifetime of hidden genius. We all know someone who has been underestimated, or maybe we've been that person ourselves. If you believe that true courage often hides in plain sight, and that integrity is the greatest strength of all, then make sure you subscribe to our channel. We bring stories like this every week to prove that a person's true worth can never be judged by a uniform or a job title. You won't want to miss what's coming. The night on Wall Street had its own pulse, a silent hum of power and money that never truly slept. On the 48th floor of Sterling Holdings, that hum was Leo Morales' only companion. The smell of carnauba wax and window cleaner was the air he breathed, the reflection of a tired man in a gray uniform, superimposed over the Manhattan skyline, was the only face he saw for hours on end. Leo moved with a ghostly efficiency. Every motion was precise, economical, perfected over 974 nights of practice. His cleaning cart glided over the Italian marble without a sound, a silent extension of his own being. He emptied bins filled with profit and loss reports and polished brass nameplates he never bothered to memorize. There was one exception. At the end of the main hall, the corner office belonged to Christopher Harrison, senior partner. The nameplate was bigger. The solid oak door seemed more imposing. Leo always spent extra time polishing that plaque, not out of respect, but because grime seemed to collect on it more, as if it attracted the floor's dust. Earlier that evening, he had seen Brad Shaw, the young broker, leaving that very office, his face pale and wearing a forced smile. An omen that Leo, at the time, had ignored. He was part of the furniture, a functional shadow ensuring the stage was perfect for the gods of capital who would arrive at dawn. The young brokers and analysts, if they were still around when his shift began, looked right through him, their conversations about yachts, bonuses, and acquisitions passing over his shoulders as if he were made of air. His routine was an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. At 11 p.m., he cleaned the West Wing. At midnight, the pantry. At 1 a.m., the East Wing. But before he began, there was the ritual. In his narrow metal locker, next to a bottle of disinfectant, was a single photograph. The image, its edges worn from touch, showed an 8-year-old girl with a smile that seemed too big for her small face, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Maya. His heart ached with a mix of love and panic every time he looked at the photo. Maya was his why. The reason he endured the invisibility, the chemical scent, the ache in his back. She was the reason he had traded designer suits for a gray jumpsuit, boardrooms in Shanghai for empty hallways in New York. He closed the locker gently, the metallic click sounding loud in the silence. It was time to start. He pushed his cart down the main corridor, the glow of the city lights dancing on the freshly polished floor. That's when he heard it. First, a distant murmur, then the unmistakable sound of expensive shoes and arrogant laughter. The sound ricocheted off the marble, growing in volume. It was laughter that held no joy, only contempt. And it was coming straight for him. Leo stopped at the end of the hall, in front of the golden elevators. On one side, a glass wall overlooked the city's abyss. On the other, the corridor from which the sound came. There was nowhere to go. He felt exposed under the cold ceiling lights. The sound of expensive shoes on the floor drew closer, fast and rhythmic. Click, clack, click. A countdown to the humiliation he knew was coming. 4 figures emerged from the hallway, silhouetted against the lights of a distant office. At the center of the group was Brad Shaw, young, with impeccable blonde hair and a smile that never reached his cold eyes. Brad was the embodiment of Wall Street arrogance. He had just closed a huge deal and was floating on a cloud of testosterone and success. His 3 companions were mere satellites, laughing at his unfunny jokes and feeding his ego. They stopped a few feet from Leo, forming a semicircle that blocked any escape. The smell of expensive whiskey hung in the air. "Well, look what we have here, boys," Brad said, his voice echoing in the hall. "The master of the nocturnal universe, the CEO of the MOP. How's business, Chief?" Leo remained silent, his hands gripping the handle of his cart. He focused on a spot just over Brad's shoulder, a technique he'd learned to dissociate. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. Cat got your tongue? One of Brad's cronies sneered. Brad stepped forward, his smile widening. I have an idea, he said, his eyes glinting with a malice that seemed a little forced, a little desperate. He turned and walked to his desk. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before grabbing a thick folder with a dark blue cover. It was the folder Harrison had given him hours before with a stern warning. As he picked it up, a chill ran down his spine, but he masked it with a layer of swagger. He returned to the group, swinging the folder. Here's the deal, genius, Brad said, holding out the folder. This here is a contract, an acquisition proposal. Only thing is, it's in Mandarin, Chinese. You get it? He glanced at his friends, seeking validation. Harrison trusts me with this, so it's the real deal. Leo said nothing. The name Harrison set off a silent alarm in his mind. Brad laughed, a sound a little louder than necessary. Let's make a bet. Me and the boys here were just discussing how overrated fluency is. I bet anyone can do it. He shoved the folder into Leo's chest, forcing him to take it. Translate this, every word, by dawn. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. If you can translate this folder by 7 a.m., I'll give you my entire annual bonus. 100% of it. $500,000. No joke. The others snickered, amazed at Brad's casual cruelty. $500,000 was a sum that would change Leo's life 10 times over. For Brad, it was a pawn in a game of humiliation. The offer was so absurd, so impossible, that it was the ultimate insult. Brad clapped Leo on the shoulder, a falsely friendly gesture. Good luck, champ. He turned to leave, his satellites following. They were already laughing about where they'd go for their next drink. Leo stood frozen, holding the heavy folder. As they walked down the hall, he heard one of Brad's friends whisper, a note of genuine dread in his voice. Brad, for God's sake, that's the Phoenix folder. Harrison will kill you. What are you doing? Brad's reply was a low, defensive snarl, the bravado vanishing for a second. He's never gonna know, because the janitor can't read Chinese, you idiot. Now shut up. The question hung in the air. Brad wasn't just being cruel, he was scared. And scared people do stupid, dangerous things. The folder in his hands suddenly felt radioactive. The sound of the elevator arriving and departing echoed across the floor, leaving Leo in a deep, absolute silence. He looked down at the blue folder in his hands. Phoenix. The name evoked images of rebirth, of something rising from the ashes. But in the context of Wall Street, it often meant something else, destruction to create an opportunity for a select few. He walked slowly to the glass wall and stared at his own reflection. The man in the glass was tired, his shoulders stooped from the weight of the world. But behind those eyes, a switch had been flipped. A part of him he had kept dormant for 5 long years was beginning to stir. A flash. He isn't in a grey uniform, but in a bespoke Xenia suit. The setting isn't an empty hallway, but a boardroom on the 58th floor of a Shanghai skyscraper. He is on his feet, speaking in fluent, confident Mandarin, dissecting the finer points of a merger agreement. The Chinese executives across the table aren't looking at him with contempt, but with respect. They called him Long Wang, the Dragon King, for his ability to sniff out weaknesses and opportunities no one else saw. Another flash, more painful, a sterile hospital room, the constant beep of a heart monitor. His wife Isabella's hand is cold in his. Her eyes, once so full of life, are clouded. Promise me, Leo, she whispers, her voice faint. Promise me you'll take care of our Maya. Give her a simple life, away from this world, this poison. He promised, tears streaming down his face. And when Isabella was gone, he made good on it. He sold everything, left the corporate world behind, and became a ghost. all to give Maya the normal, safe life he had promised. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. He had clung to that promise, but the simple life he sought had become a constant struggle against Maya's rising medical bills. Her asthma had worsened, requiring ever more expensive treatments and specialists. Simplicity had become a trap. With steady hands, he opened the Phoenix folder. His eyes, once tired, were now sharp, focused. They scanned the first few lines of the document. The language was dense financial and legal jargon, the kind of text designed to be impenetrable to any outsider, but to Leo, it was like reading a children's story. It was his mother tongue. He flipped through the pages, his mind processing the information at high speed. Terms like leveraged buyout, cascading default clauses, special purpose entities. And then he stopped. On the first page, beneath the project title, was the document's designation. His lips formed the words in silence and his blood ran cold. It wasn't a standard acquisition contract. The title read, Jieyi Bei Wanglu, Jieyi Bei Wanglu, Side Letter Agreement. A chill ran down Leo's spine. In his years in the business, he had only seen this type of document a few times. It was a tool of the shadows. A secret agreement that runs parallel to a main contract, containing the true, dirty, and often illegal terms that cannot see the light of day. Brad hadn't given him a contract. He had given him a confession. Brad's office, with its $10,000 leather chair and panoramic view, was the last place Leo could work unseen. He needed a sanctuary. He pushed his cart to the back of a service corridor and slipped into a large supply closet, the smell of cardboard and cleaning fluid enveloping him. It was a windowless space, lit by a single fluorescent bulb that hummed softly. Perfect. He sat on an overturned bucket, placed the Phoenix folder on a box of supplies, and began the real work. He didn't need a dictionary. The words and characters flowed from his mind to the tip of the pen he retrieved from his pocket. He wasn't just translating, he was analyzing, connecting the dots, just as he had in his former life. He grabbed a yellow legal pad from the cart and began making notes in English alongside his translations. The first crack in the facade appeared on page 3. The document detailed a series of scheduled payments, totaling tens of millions of dollars, to be made not to the target company, but to an entity called Apex Global Ventures LLC. The address listed wasn't in Delaware or New York, but a P.O. box in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. A red flag the size of a building. Leo took out his cheap prepaid phone with its cracked screen. He was thankful the company's Wi-Fi was open and fast. With fingers trembling from adrenaline, he typed Apex Global Ventures LLC into the search engine. Results, 0. No official website. No mention in the financial press. No listing in business directories. It was a digital ghost, a classic shell company, designed for one thing: to launder money and hide ownership. Brad wasn't just being arrogant, he was being incredibly careless. Leo kept reading, his heart pounding against his ribs. The side agreement stipulated that in the event of certain default events the document itself seemed engineered to cause, Apex Global Ventures would have the right to acquire all of the subsidiaries' assets for a fraction of their market value. It was an asset stripping scheme. They were going to bleed the subsidiary dry, trigger the default, and then buy it for pennies on the dollar, leaving Sterling Holdings with the loss. Suddenly, he froze. A sound. Slow, steady footsteps in the service corridor. Click. 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 It was the steady rhythm of John, the night security guard, a large, methodical man who made his rounds with military precision. Panic rose in Leo's throat. He was in an unauthorized area, off his cleaning route, with a top-level confidential document spread around him. In seconds, he swept the dozens of pages together, shoved them back into the blue folder, and hid it, along with his legal pad, inside an open box of paper towel rolls. He stood up, grabbed a mop, and began cleaning a non-existent spot on the floor, trying to look busy and natural. The shadow of John's shoes appeared under the door. The footsteps stopped. The silence seemed to last an eternity. Leo held his breath, the sound of his own heart hammering in his ears. Then he saw the metal handle of the supply closet door begin to slowly, silently turn. The door creaked open, revealing the imposing figure of John, the security guard. His eyes scanned the storeroom, landing on Leo. "Everything all right in here, Leo?" John asked, his deep voice echoing in the small space. "Yeah, John. Just restocking supplies," Leo replied, forcing a calm he didn't feel. He gestured with the mop toward the shelf. "Ran out of floor cleaner in the east wing." John nodded slowly, his probing eyes sweeping the room one more time. For a terrifying moment, Leo thought he would glance into the box of paper towels. But John's gaze passed right over it. He was just doing his job. "All right, don't work too hard. This place doesn't deserve it." He gave a small nod and pulled the door shut, continuing his rounds down the hall. Leo leaned against the wall, his body trembling, and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The danger had passed, but the adrenaline left him more alert than ever. That was a warning. Time was running out, and the stakes were higher than he'd imagined. He returned to his work with a renewed urgency. This was no longer about winning a bet or proving a point to an arrogant fool. This was about unraveling a crime happening under the roof of this very company. With every page he translated, the scheme became clearer and more audacious. Artificially inflated revenue projections, default clauses with absurdly sensitive triggers, a complex web of deceit designed to look like a bad deal, when in fact it was a meticulously planned theft. He could feel the ghost of the Dragon King taking over, his mind working on a level he hadn't accessed in years. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The project's name, Phoenix, made sense now. They planned to burn the subsidiary to the ground so their own empire could rise from its ashes, funded by Sterling Holdings money. He glanced at the cheap watch on his wrist. 3:17 a.m. The sky outside was still pitch black, but dawn was approaching like a freight train. He needed more time. He needed to be faster. His pen flew across the legal pad, the script becoming more hurried, almost illegible to anyone but him. He was so immersed, so focused, that the outside world had vanished, until his inside world brought him back to reality with a jolt. His cheap phone, set to silent in his pocket, vibrated. The vibration felt like an electric shock in his hyper-focused state. He hesitated. No one ever texted him at this hour. It could be an emergency. With a sense of dread, he pulled the phone from his pocket. The cracked screen showed a text message notification. The sender was the main number for Mount Sinai Children's Hospital. His heart stopped. The words on the screen were clinical, cold, and utterly terrifying. "Mr. Morales, this is the night nurse in pediatric respiratory. We need to discuss Maya's latest scans as soon as possible. Please call back at your earliest convenience." The world of high finance, Mandarin contracts, and corporate schemes instantly dissolved. All that remained was the raw, primal fear of a father for his child. The Phoenix folder in his hands felt meaningless. Brad's humiliation, a distant memory. The weight of his personal universe and the danger of his professional one had just collided with cataclysmic force. With trembling hands, Leo dialed the hospital's number. Each ring of the call felt like a hammer blow to his chest. The calm, professional voice of the nurse on the other end was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. "Mr. Morales, thank you for calling back," she said. "We got the results from the evening's imaging tests. The inflammation in Maya's lungs, it has worsened significantly. The standard medication is no longer responding as we'd hoped." Leo closed his eyes, leaning his head against the cold storeroom wall. What does that mean?" There was a pause. "It means we need to consider more aggressive options. Dr. Evans mentioned a new experimental treatment, a type of gene therapy. It's shown promising results in cases like Maya's, but what?" Leo pleaded, his voice cracking. "But it's extremely expensive. And because it's experimental, your insurance plan refuses to cover it. The out-of-pocket cost for the initial treatment would be..." The nurse hesitated again, as if afraid to say the number. Around $400,000. $400,000. The number hung in the air, an impassable chasm. It was a sum so astronomical, so far removed from his reality, that he almost laughed at the cosmic irony. He earned less in a year than the cost of a single stationery order in this office. How could he possibly get $400,000? And then the thought hit him like a lightning strike. Brad's bonus. The cruel bet. $500,000. The bet was no longer an insult. It was no longer about pride or revenge. It had become, in the space of a single sentence, his daughter's only lifeline, her only hope. The pressure he'd felt before was a gentle breeze compared to the hurricane that now consumed him. Losing was not an option. "I understand," Leo said, his voice now strangely firm, forged in desperation. I'll get the money. Tell Dr. Evans to prepare whatever is necessary." He hung up before the nurse could question the impossible promise he had just made. The ache in his chest transformed into a cold, sharp determination. He turned back to the Phoenix folder with the fury of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to gain. He was no longer just unraveling a crime. He was fighting for Maya's life. The pages flew under his fingers. His mind was clearer than ever. And it was then, in the middle of a secondary beneficiaries clause, buried under layers of legalese, that he found it. A name. A name that shouldn't have been there. The ultimate beneficiary of the Cayman Islands shell company, Apex Global Ventures, wasn't Brad. Brad was just a pawn, the public face of the scheme. The true owner, the name that stood to receive the lion's share of the profits from the heist, was one. C. Harrison. Christopher Harrison. Leo felt the air leave his lungs. This wasn't a junior broker and his friends. This was one of the most senior and powerful partners at Sterling Holdings, a man whose smiling face was framed in the main hallway, one of the pillars of the firm. The conspiracy wasn't some small scheme by a rogue employee. It went all the way to the top, and he was about to expose it. The discovery of Harrison's name was the final piece of the puzzle. Everything snapped into place with terrifying clarity. Brad wasn't the mastermind. He was the designated fall guy, the ambitious young wolf willing to take the risk for a slice of the pie, while the older shark stayed in the shadows. Project Phoenix was an insider predator's masterpiece. Leo looked at his notes. He had everything. The mechanism of the fraud, the shell company, the beneficiaries, the step-by-step plan. He held the murder weapon in his hands, and now he had a choice. The easy path was to simply hand the literal translation to Brad, fulfill his end of the bet. He could take the money, save Maya, and disappear back into his invisible life. It was the logical choice, the survivor's choice. The money for his daughter's treatment was right there, within his grasp. He closed his eyes, and the image of the hospital waiting room mingled with a distant memory, a conversation on a rainy night with Isabella, long before her illness. She had noticed how the job was consuming him, hardening his edges. She had cupped his face in her hands, her eyes serious and full of love. "It's not enough to survive, Leo," she'd said softly, but with a steel-like strength. "It's not enough to just get through the days. Maya needs to see in you the man she will look up to, a good man. That's the only inheritance that matters." The memory hit him with the force of a wave. He opened his eyes. Handing over the translation and taking the dirty money would be surviving. But it wouldn't be the act of a man Maya could admire. It would be becoming part of the poison Isabella had hated so much. He would be buying his daughter's health with his soul, and that was not an inheritance he was willing to leave. The choice was made. The doubt evaporated, replaced by an icy clarity of purpose. With a new resolve, he took his legal pad and began rewriting his notes on a clean sheet of paper. This time, he wasn't just translating, he was building a case. For every translated clause from Mandarin, He added a footnote in English, sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Where the contract mentioned Apex Global Ventures, Leo's note read, "Note, unregistered entity, consistent with a shell corporation for purposes of tax evasion and ownership concealment." Where the contract detailed the asset transfer, Leo's note explained, "Note, classic asset stripping mechanism, designed to artificially bankrupt the subsidiary." Where Harrison's name appeared, Leo's note was simple and devastating. Note, ultimate beneficiary, indicating partner-level conspiracy. He worked for another hour, transforming a translation document into an irrefutable indictment. When he was finished, he went to the nearest printer copier on the main floor. The hum of the machine sounded deafening in the pre-dawn silence. He made 2 perfect copies of the entire dossier, the translation and his annihilating footnotes. He walked to Brad's immaculate desk. With deliberate care, he placed one of the copies right in the center, perfectly aligned with the keyboard. Exactly as promised. The bait. He stepped away, his heart beating with a steady, dangerous rhythm. As he walked back into the shadows of the service corridor, the faint office light glinted off the second copy he held tightly in his hand. The trap was set. Now, all he had to do was wait for the sun. And the bait for the second part of his plan was already being prepared on his phone. The first ray of sunlight hit the top of the skyscraper, painting the sky orange and purple. It was 7:01 a.m. As if summoned by the clock, Brad and his 2 friends stepped out of the elevator. Their faces were a bit pale from a night of drinking, but their smiles were wide and full of anticipation. They were here for the spectacle. "So, where's our star translator?" Brad called out, looking around the now semi-lit office, probably crying in a broom closet. His friends laughed. They walked toward Brad's desk, and that's when he stopped. His laugh died in his throat. There, on his desk, was a neat stack of paper, impeccably printed, perfectly aligned. Brad's expression shifted from arrogance to confusion. He picked up the first page. It was the translation. He flipped through it quickly, a crease forming on his forehead. The translation looked complete, professional. "No way," he muttered. One of his friends peered over his shoulder. Did he actually do it? No way. Brad kept flipping, and his confusion began to curdle into an icy dread. It wasn't just the translation, it was the footnotes, small paragraphs of English text at the bottom of each page. His eyes widened as he read the words. Fraudulent asset transfer, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, ultimate beneficiary, C. Harrison. The blood drained from Brad's face. This wasn't a translation. It was an autopsy of his crime. The janitor hadn't just read the Chinese squiggles. He had understood. He had connected every dot. He knew everything. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He looked up, his eyes searching desperately for Leo, but the hallway was empty. "What the hell is this?" one of his friends stammered, backing away from the desk as if the papers were on fire. Brad crumpled the first page in his fist. This is garbage. He made it all up. That little..." Ding. The sound of the main elevator arriving cut through the tense air. The golden doors slid open, revealing a sight that made every heart on the floor stop. Mr. Sterling, the CEO and founder of Sterling Holdings, a man in his 70s with a presence that commanded equal parts respect and fear. He rarely visited the trading floors, preferring to stay in his top-floor suite. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 burly security guards and Maria Sanchez, the firm's ruthless head of legal. A hush fell over the office. Everyone froze. Sterling's steel-like gaze swept across the room, ignoring everyone until it landed on Brad Shaw. And then everyone saw it. In Mr. Sterling's hands, he was holding an identical copy of the stack of papers that sat on Brad's desk. The translation, and the footnotes. The atmosphere on the 48th floor grew thin. No one moved. No one breathed. The only thing you could hear was the low hum of the ventilation system. Mr. Sterling walked slowly toward Brad's desk, his expensive shoes making a soft, menacing sound on the marble. He stopped and placed his copy of the dossier next to Brad's. They were identical. "Mr. Shaw," Sterling said, his voice calm but sharp as broken glass. "I received a very interesting email at 5:32 this morning, an anonymous email. It contained this file. Would you care to explain to me what Project Phoenix is?" All eyes turned to Brad. The young broker's face was a mask of panic. He looked at his friends, who shrank back, abandoning him. He looked at the dossier, then at Sterling's impassive face. And then he made his final mistake. He tried to lie. "Sir, I don't know what you're talking about," Brad stammered. This has to be a mistake, a setup. It was the janitor. He was acting strangely all night. He must have planted this. He's a liar." The moment the word liar left his lips, a figure emerged from the service corridor. It was Leo. He was no longer hiding in the shadows. He pushed his cleaning cart with a deliberate calm, the slight squeak of the wheels the only sound accompanying his approach. He stopped a few feet from the group, his face serene, his eyes fixed not on Brad, but on the CEO. Sterling turned to Leo. He looked at the gray uniform, the calloused hands, the face of a man he probably saw every day in the elevator, but had never truly seen. Leo cleared his throat. And when he spoke, the voice that came out was not that of a timid janitor. It was the voice of a senior analyst, clear, articulate, and ringing with unshakable authority. "Project Phoenix, Mr. Sterling," Leo began, "is a strip-and-flip scheme designed to fraudulently transfer the assets of your Shanghai subsidiary to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, Apex Global Ventures, following a deliberately triggered debt default." A collective gasp went through the office. Leo continued, addressing Sterling directly as if giving a report. "Mr. Shaw here is the frontline operator. However, the documentation reveals that the ultimate beneficiary, with a 90% stake in the shell company, is senior partner Christopher Harrison." Right on cue, the elevator chimed again. Christopher Harrison strode out, smiling, a cup of coffee in hand, ready to start his day. His smile froze as he took in the scene. His eyes met Sterling's, then darted to the papers on Brad's desk. Panic bloomed on his face. Chaos erupted. Harrison began yelling, calling it slander and absurd. Brad babbled, pointing at Leo and calling him a lunatic. Mr. Sterling raised a single hand. Silence returned instantly. He completely ignored the two imploding men. His piercing gaze was fixed on Leo, the calm center of the storm. There was a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning respect in his eyes. He asked a single question, his voice low and filled with genuine curiosity. "Who the hell are you?" Sterling's question hung in the air, weighted with everything that had happened. Leo looked at the CEO, a man who represented the world he had abandoned, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt no fear or inferiority. He felt peace. "My name is Leo Morales," he said, his voice steady. "Before I pushed this cart, I was the head of M&A analysis for Asia at Rivington Capital. I left 5 years ago to care for my daughter after my wife passed away." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Rivington Capital, Leo Morales. Some of the older hands on the floor remembered the name, the Dragon King, a legend who had vanished at the height of his career. They were looking at a ghost. Sterling absorbed the information, his face a mixture of astonishment and understanding. It all made sense now. The fluency, the analysis, the courage. He turned to Brad and Harrison, his eyes now like ice. "Security," he commanded. "Escort Mr. Shaw and Mr. Harrison out of the building. Their access is revoked. Ms. Sanchez will handle the termination procedures and notify the federal authorities." Brad crumpled. "No, please, Mr. Sterling, it was a joke, a stupid bet." "You bet my company's future," Sterling replied coldly, "and you lost." As security dragged the two disgraced men away, Sterling turned his full attention back to Leo. The entire floor was watching, dead silent. "The bet, as I understand it, was for Mr. Shaw's bonus," Sterling said. "Consider it done. The finance department will have the $500,000 transfer processed to your account today." Leo felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. Maya. Her treatment was paid for. Tears welled in his eyes, but he held them back. "But that's not enough," Sterling continued. "A man of your caliber, of your integrity. Your place is not cleaning my floors. It's protecting my firm." He extended his hand. "Leo, I'm creating a new division, effective today. The Corporate Oversight and Integrity Division. It will report directly to me, and I want you to run it. Salary and benefits to match what you were making at Rivington, and then some." The offer was staggering. It was more than redemption. It was a resurrection. Leo looked at Sterling's outstretched hand. He thought of his promise to Isabella, a simple life. But he realized simplicity didn't mean poverty or invisibility. It meant security. It meant peace. And this job, this role, would give him the means to protect Maya in a way his night job never could. He could give her the best care, the best life, not by drowning in Wall Street's poison, but by serving as its antidote. He shook Sterling's hand. "I accept, sir." The final scene doesn't take place in an office of glass and steel, but in a quiet hospital room, painted in soft colors. Leo is sitting beside Maya's bed, holding her small hand as she sleeps peacefully. The gentle sound of her breathing, the most beautiful sound in the world. Afternoon sun streams through the window, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. The notification of the bank transfer is on his phone, but he doesn't even look at it. His eyes are fixed on his daughter. Maya stirs, and her eyes flutter open. She smiles, a sleepy, love-filled smile. "Hi, Papa." Leo smiles back, the tears finally falling freely down his face. "Hi, my love," he whispers, squeezing her hand. "Papa did it. Everything's going to be okay now." He was no longer Leo Morales, the invisible janitor. He was Leo Morales, Maya's father. And he was home. What an incredible story of quiet strength, integrity, and hidden talent. Leo's journey really makes you think, doesn't it? How about you? Have you ever been completely underestimated, at work or in life, only to prove everyone wrong? Or maybe you've witnessed someone else go through it. We would love to read your story. Share it in the comments below. We read every single one, and your experiences inspire our whole community. If Leo's journey resonated with you, please give this video a like. It really helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories of hope and justice. And of course, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring story. Until next time, remember to look beneath the surface. You never know what kind of greatness you might find.